Crossing the Atlantic in Africa, another ethnic group of born survivors is about to disappear as a result of destructive Western influences. The San, or Bushmen, always lived incredibly well adapted to the deserts of Namibia and Botswana as hunter-gatherers, an anachronistic system of life for which there would seem to be no place in our agricultural and industrial society dominated by the global economy. Already less than 5% of the San continue this traditional way of life. The rest have been rehoused by the Botswanan Government in ghettos, where they are provided with water wells and a small state subsidy in exchange for doing nothing. And naturally, they get bored. The mythical Bushmen, who had inhabited southern Africa since prehistoric times with their own unique language and physical characteristics, were first forced out by the black Bantu peoples and later decimated by the European colonists. Once they had been corralled into the poorest lands that no one else wanted, such as the Kalahari and Namib deserts, they managed to survive, until now. But they are losing the fight to whiskey, beer and drugs, the only thing the civilized members of the great global tribe taught them to use. Now they live on tiny, miserable plots of lands with 100 square meters of nothing and a future of cultural extermination. As they never registered their lands, as they do not have accounts in any bank, they are no one. These people never wanted for anything while they maintained their traditional way of life. Though it might seem hard to believe, the daily life of the hunter-gatherers permitted a degree of leisure and a quality of life that cannot be matched in the modern Western cities, except by the upper classes, and even then their health and longevity were almost comparable with ours. Now, everything is different. Throughout the planet, we can find many similar stories. The Australian Aborigines are also an ancient people of expert hunter-gatherers who little by little have been driven out by the global culture. But why does this happen? What are the origins of this phenomenon? It is a slow process, a clear example of human ecology which can be traced back to the Neolithic age, when men and women began to develop agriculture and livestock breeding, abandoning the old system of hunting and gathering. Hunter-gatherers move around from one place to another, catching animals and eating the seasonal fruits of the plants. As a result, they don't have many personal belongings, and there is a great equality in the wealth of individuals. Nor do they claim the land. Quite simply, when there is no more hunting or the fruits run out, they move on to another area. But agricultural peoples are very different. They invest a great deal of time and effort in looking after the land, and therefore defend it, considering it to be their property. They put up fences and so establish the basis of differences. If you have a lot of land, you get rich. If not, you have to work for someone else in exchange for a salary. In this way, cities and private property were born, the product of agriculture with surpluses. However, these Aborigines, like the San and many others, clung to the old system of hunter-gatherers, and in time we have fenced in more and more land until they have been left with nothing. To ease their consciences in the face of this flagrant theft of their lands, the respective governments offer them little prefabricated houses and an allowance in exchange for giving up their traditional practices. They then simply disappear, consumed by alcoholism and drugs. They are unable to cope with the dark side of the dominant civilization. All this is happening right now before our very eyes, and in the whole world, barely a handful of organizations are fighting against it. Struggles for land have been merciless throughout the history of humanity. Cambodia. In this land, humans have sown the seeds of death. Over 20 years of wars have left the legacy of approximately 10 million landmines scattered around the entire country.
He said no problem, he will tell you, but he just want to...
2,500 Cambodians have been trained to deactivate these mines, and with the invaluable help of the NGOs have managed to clear around 10 million square kilometers. Each detection and deactivation costs approximately $1,000, an incredibly high price for the Cambodians, which they could not pay alone. The country is infested with mines. There are at present over 35,000 amputees, and every day they are joined by 10 more mutilated people. Every attempt to cultivate the land here means risking death or invalidity. A number of care centers try to ease the suffering of the victims as much as possible, offering them shelter and medical attention. They also provide psychological support services and make false limbs which help some 1,000 people a year to walk again. Paradoxically, many of these victims find work making wheelchairs. But the majority of the mines are still there, waiting for someone to stand on them and so create one more social outcast or one more shattered corpse. The most highly developed primate on the planet, with his enormous brain, has advanced so fast that he has often forgotten that diversity is a source of richness. For 40 years, the Tibetan people have been suffering a gradual cultural genocide carried out by the Chinese government. Tibetan identity is quite simply being crushed. The Chinese government provides incentives for its people to settle in Tibetan territory, allowing them to have 2 children there instead of 1 as in the rest of the country. It also backs prostitution and helps the Chinese to set up the best businesses, taking them away from the local Tibetan population. In 1958, the Chinese army invaded Tibet. Since then, over 1.5 million Tibetans have died, murdered in Chinese jails, and around 130,000 have fled the country and are trying to protect their culture and Buddhism in neighboring countries such as Nepal and India. The Tibetans are forced to cross the highest mountains on the planet on a dangerous 3-day journey on foot in order to reach Kathmandu, the capital of neighboring Nepal, and from there on to Dharamsala. Many die on the way, and those that make it arrive with serious frostbite, which is treated in reception centers on the other side. From here, they will be distributed to the different Tibetan settlements in Indian territory. China seeks to deliberately destroy the Tibetan culture. It hates the religion, the language, and the spirituality of these people, who it has turned into outcasts in their own country. Is this the price we have to pay in order to maintain the so-called welfare society? Perhaps too high a price. Nature has taught us that such imbalances will sooner or later turn against us all. Perhaps the outcasts will disappear first, but in the end the system will collapse in any case if we don't remedy the situation in time.